for another episode of Popcorn and Parachute Pants, a podcast where we discuss the very best of movies of the 1980s. And now, here are your hosts, Mr. Fingaz and Nick Rosario.
Well, hello everybody. How are we doing? Welcome to another episode of Popcorn and Parachutes, an 80s movie podcast. I am here as always with my buddy Mr. Fingaz, Anthony Handy, whatever you want to call him, just don't call him late for dinner. And myself, Nick Rosario. We're here, we're back, and we're gonna do something a little bit different. If you've been paying attention and you've watched our other episodes, we tend to fare with the lighthearted stuff because Handy and I are pretty lighthearted. But anywho, I'm full of them today, folks. I'm on a roll. Let me tell you, I got plenty of sleep last night. I'm ready to go. But yeah, we are going to tackle something a little bit different than from what you're used to with us. We got a little serious on here. We're going to go historical this week with you. And we're going to talk about something that is a very serious, in the sense of the subject matter of the movie. So I'm going to throw that over to Mr. Handy, as I like to call him. And he's going to let you know what we're going to be talking about this week. Handy, let him have it.
Hello, greetings and salutations from the 405, where the wind comes whipping down the plain in the heart of Oklahoma City. I am the other half of this wonderful panel here on Popcorn and Parachute Pants today. Like my boy Nick said, we love the comedies. Nick and I love the comedies. We can talk about them all day. We can quote all the lines. We can do all of that good stuff. Today we decided to go a little bit different because there were some very impactful movies in the 80s that were very on the serious side. And this one deals with a historic topic, that historic topic being the Civil War. It wasn't a star-studded cast, but it did have a very good cast of characters. And it did take home a nice little box full of awards at the Oscars. Today, ladies and gentlemen, the subject of today's show is none other than the epic Civil War film Glory, and directed by Edward Zwick. If you don't know who Edward Zwick is, and I suspect that some of you don't, just because his big breakout movie was during the 80s, is a film called About Last Night. This is a total 180 from what he normally directs. But it turned out to be more of a permanent 180, as Nick and I were discussing before the show, that he just kind of went full hardcore into serious topics with further films. Very well directed movie, and I'm not going to give too much more of it away because we're going to talk about a lot of it. So let's go ahead and get into it, Nick. I honestly, this is the first movie that, just due to what the movie was about, that for me at times was hard to watch, and I don't have to explain for obvious reasons why. But just to give a brief synopsis of the film, we all know what the Civil War was about. There's been a lot of argument about it at late, but we're not going to get into that. But what we do know is that the president of the United States at the time, Abraham Lincoln, was working to get slavery abolished. And the country was divided. You had the United States of America and the Confederate States of America. And the two sides there were definitely a definitive line drawn in the sand on that issue and on whose side they were, the blues versus the grays, as it were. And at some point during the war, the decision was made to allow former slaves and freed African-American men to fight on the side of the Union. And that is where this movie comes into play. And Nick, I'm going to hand it to you and let you take the second half of the synopsis.
Yeah, so we start, the movie opens in Massachusetts, 1862, probably about November, they say. They're going to implement the first black regiment, the 54th Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry, is going to be formed, and they're looking for volunteers, obviously. And this is where we pick up the story, and they're going to be led by a man named Robert Gouldshaw, because they make him a colonel to lead this regiment, played by Matthew Broderick in the movie. So Colonel Robert Shaw is going to lead the first black regiment here in the film, and obviously one of the early scenes, which he didn't play a big part, But there's a part where he's at his parents' house for a party, and they introduce him to Frederick Douglass. And for
Hmm.
those of you who know your history, Frederick Douglass was a very big uh, in that time, being a black man, he carried a lot of weight with what he said and a lot of what he tried to do to help black people. So this was it's an important scene. You don't see Frederick Douglass too much in the movie, but in the beginning he says, the father says, "Here, have you met Frederick Douglass?" And he says, "No, I haven't." They shake hands and that whole thing, and it's a significant thing, I think, for that reason. So as you go, you start people, and I think one important thing to remind you here is that they know someone. Him and Kerry Elwes is also in the film. He plays Major Cabot Forbes, who becomes like Matthew Broderick's second in command, as it were, his right hand man. Um, they have a friend, Andre Brower, who was a freedman. He was not a slave at the time. They knew him. He was, he's a well read guy. He read, he wrote, that sort of thing. His father was free as well. His character's name is Thomas Searles. Sorry. And so he decides he wants to sign up. He wants to be, he asked Matthew Broderick, "Hey, I hear is it true they're gonna have a black regiment? I want to be the first one." He's very excited, all that stuff, and that'll be important as we go along, as you'll understand why the significance of Andre Brower wanting to, being friends with them, but also wanting to be in this regiment, how much that conflicts with what's going on. But yeah, that's where we start the story, Anthony. Why don't you go ahead and get a little bit into more and how we progress through some of this?
Well, as can be expected during those times, the black soldiers were um, they were met with they were met
Yeah, they were
with
meant. Yeah,
some resistance.
yeah,
Some folks looked at it with a very um, interesting. I have to pick my words carefully here because it's like
no, I get it. Yeah, I understand.
but they were met with sometimes with interesting sense of humor.
Yeah,
There were a lot of obstacles that the men faced as they were training, like the quartermaster intentionally holding back supplies,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
finding out that they weren't getting paid as the same rate as the rest of the soldiers, which, by the way, from a historic standpoint of view, actually did happen with the protest against the pay,
Yeah,
but it wasn't a deal where they were tearing up their pay slips. That part
right.
was just added
Yeah,
into the film.
we got to
But
Hollywood it a little bit, right?
yeah, oh,
You got to,
They Hollywooded this thing up to
yeah,
I mean, you have to have an interesting story.
yeah,
But the protest for the pay definitely did happen. There was some, they were just given some menial tasks and things of that nature. But one thing I think that definitely started to turn to help the unit turn the corner was their drill instructor. And there's no military movie unless it starts right in the middle that doesn't have a sequence with the drill instructor. And
yeah.
that is when the Fighting 54th was introduced to Sergeant Major Mulcahy, played expertly by John Finn. And if you went and watched, don't go run into your IMDb right now because he doesn't have an exceptionally long filmography. But he's well known for playing character actors and
Yeah,
character. He's well known for playing character bits. He's known as
yeah,
a character actor. Um, and so this particular character, I will venture out to say, is equally impactful as Gunny Hartman in Full Metal Jacket, just maybe
oh,
not
yeah.
as memorable because
Well,
he
yeah.
didn't take up the entire first half of the film.
Correct.
But
And
he
it's
taught.
funny you mentioned the John Finn. I know for the younger people, I just wanted to mention this real quick. Sorry, Andy.
Oh, go
You
ahead.
might know him from Dawson's Creek. He played Pacey's father, John Finn. So for you younger folks, that's where you'll recognize the name from, or you'll recognize when you watch the movie where you know the gentleman from. He played Pacey's dad on Dawson's Creek.
Okay. Uh, I guess
Sorry, I
I'm
just
showing
threw
my
that in
age.
there. I know.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm showing my age here. I never watched all those shows that were on the CW and
CWB, yeah,
yeah,
WB,
yeah.
WB,
Never Gilmore Girls, none of that. The
right.
side note, first time I saw Melissa McCarthy was on Mike and Molly. I knew
Yep.
nothing about the Gilmore Girls.
Right, sure.
So
Okay.
yeah, but to get back to this,
Sorry,
John,
I know. I
yeah,
threw us
no,
off. I'm
you
sorry.
good, you good, brother, you good, because these little, did you know, we need
Right.
these little nuggets too.
Yeah.
Um, So Sergeant Major begins training these soldiers and training them how to march. And he's giving them the what for? He's just trying to teach them how to march. And he goes, "Do you not know your left from your?" He said, "Well, sir, I don't know my left from my right." And he says, "Anybody else in here not know your left from your right?" And you see all these hands go up, and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's while on the one hand it's kind of like, oh, ha, 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 and then on the other hand it's like, oh, like that's just a very subtle, because remember during these times during slavery, slaves were not allowed to read. That was a crime punishable by
Yeah.
or death or whipping or dismemberment or sell off one of your family members to another plantation. Um, and so a lot of these men didn't know their right from their left, and he taught them how to march in formation. Then you see the sequence where he's teaching them how to, where they're doing marksmanship, and that's
Yeah.
when they bring out one of my favorite minor characters, a character by the name of Jupiter Sharts, and yes,
Yeah.
that is his real name,
It is, yeah.
played by Kennedy.
Yeah.
Um, and he's picking off targets, and they go, "Man, you're a great shot. You're like shooting squirrels, sir." So
Exactly.
Colonel Shaw starts to tell him, "You gotta move faster. You have to load your gun faster. Load faster." He starts firing off a pistol near him to
Yeah.
set him off, and people are going, "What the hell is he doing?" And it's like, when you're in battle, you're fighting. You got a man 30 paces away from you, charging at you. A
Yeah.
good soldier can get off 3 shots. What does he say? 3 shots in less than a minute.
Yeah, he says three. You gotta get off 3 shots in less than a minute. Exactly.
You got to get off 3 shots in less than a minute, under the siege of battle. And for those of you that are a little younger demographic that are watching this, whether it's now on the release or later on down the road when you happen to stumble across this, um, battlefield fighting during the Civil War is a lot different than battlefield fighting during, it's not like Call of Duty. It's not
Yeah.
like Halo. You're not doing you're not doing a Halo jump into hostile territory on your own, armed with just your weapon and whatever ammunition you have and your trusty bayonet. I mean, you're talking 100 soldiers lined up in close quarters formation,
Yeah.
firing at each other, as was evidenced by the battle of the battle. And then the scene that training comes back to save his life in the Battle of James Island. You
Yeah.
see him standing in a tree, furiously loading his weapon while
Yeah.
this guy's
Yeah.
charging at him, and
Yeah.
he popped him right in the head. Um, so a whole different style of battlefield fighting. But I loved Jupiter Sharks and the training that John Fenn gave them,
Yeah.
and you start to see that he is, to use a modern term, he's an ally, so to speak. He wants these
Yeah.
men to succeed. He's one of the
Right.
few people that wants these men to succeed.
Yeah.
And of course, then we cannot mention Sergeant Major Mulcahy without mentioning another sergeant major in the film. And this is a face that you all will easily recognize as soon as you see the name. One soldier, a little bit older, identified as a leader amongst the men immediately, in Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman.
And Morgan Freeman gets a battlefield promotion of sorts to the rank of sergeant major. I have to side note. Let me step out of this
Okay.
explanation here, this synopsis. It's funny to me to watch, and this is, Hollywood has got it kind of spot on. It's funny to me to watch how these promotions took place
Right.
in the military during that time, because I joined the military in 1993. And so you had to, I mean, you could be promoted at any time, but you generally had to, for the most part, bide at least your minimum amount of time at a certain rank before you were promoted to the next. Like
Right.
coming in as an E1, I'm sorry, I joined the military as an E3, private first class, U.S. Army, because I had some college. So you
Right.
could get credits for things. If you had a college degree, you could join as a specialist at E4.
Ah.
But
Okay.
um, I spent 2 years at the rank of E3 as a PFC, and then
Okay.
I was promoted to specialist right before I went to Korea.
Oh. Okay.
And then in order to get stripes, let alone talk about getting stripes, you have to go before a promotion board,
Right.
where went through a series of questions, a drill and ceremony, and you were questioned by first sergeants and sergeant majors within the unit. And then you had to go to a leadership course and hit a certain number of promotion points, which is based on a compilation of your physical fitness score, your rifle marksmanship score, correspondence courses, outside education, if you have any, like college,
Yeah.
and your score on the promotion board in order to get promoted to the next rank. Meanwhile, these guys is going to battle, and they're on the boat on their way to South Carolina to take on Fort Wagner,
Yeah.
and Sergeant Major Rawlins he's promoted to Sergeant Major. And for those of you that are really unfamiliar, Sergeant Major is the highest rank that you can achieve on the enlisted side of
Right.
the military. And real quick breakdown, there's like 3 classes of rank. There's the enlisted, where you as an individual go to a recruiter and say, hey, I want to join. Boom,
Right.
you come in as an enlisted. There's commissioned, where you get like guys that go to West Point, or soldiers that go through ROTC, or maybe a program called Green to Gold, where as an enlisted, you leave the military, go back to school, join ROTC, then come back and get a commission, where the government says, we are commissioning you as an officer in the United States military. And then there's the warrant officers. And warrant officers, I still to this day don't know what warrant officers do. Um, but they fall somewhere in between the enlisted and commissioned officers. So it's not necessarily commissioned, but you get all the rights and privileges of an officer in the hand salute and that
Okay.
kind of thing, and pay scale.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, he was promoted to sergeant major, and he a lot of times was the voice of reason amongst the men. And he also kind of served as the liaison between Colonel Shaw and the men,
Yeah.
kind of the spokesperson for the entire group.
Yeah.
And that at this point, Nick, this is where I'm going to kind of turn it back over to you.
Okay.
We're going to ping pong this thing here.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. But this during his promotion, which becomes one of my we talk about a lot with our movies favorite lines, type thing. And so they're on the boat to to Carolina, South Carolina. They're going to sorry, and he says, step forward, Private Rollins, and they give him the rank of sergeant major, and you know Morgan Freeman looks at Matthew Broderick and goes, I ain't sure I'm wanting this, Colonel. And Matthew Broderick looks him dead in the eye and goes, I know exactly how you feel. And the reason the reason I find that great is because, like you said, you're the leader of the first black regiment. People, looked at him like, why are you doing this? Why would you want to do this? Like, this is a losing, this is a losing thing. They're never going to see battle. Like, why are you, so the whole thing. So the fact that Matthew Broderick just looks dead serious at him and says, I know exactly how you feel, always cracked me up. It's just a lighthearted moment in a rather serious movie. But yeah, I mean, these guys are finally going to get to see a little. They think they're going to see X because I think this is where they're going to Georgia first. They meet
Right.
up with, um, man, I had it
Alabama, I
written down.
believe it's Alabama. I believe it's
Yeah,
from
it was
Alabama.
Alabama first. Yeah, so they go there, and when they get to the town, they're thinking they're going to see something, and they meet it, and they meet this sergeant who's just, the guy is just kind of he doesn't take this seriously. He has these boys like because he has a regiment of black soldiers as well. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I want to be respectful. I'm not. I know this is 2024, and a lot of people. I'm going to refer to the men in this movie as black men if that's okay with everyone. So yeah, just want to. Sorry, I know. I feel like I shouldn't have to
I
explain
think
that,
I
but
think
just
I
in
think
case, yeah,
you shouldn't. You
I know.
shouldn't. You're
Right,
right. You shouldn't. But they are.
right.
These a
They're
lot
black men. I'm sorry. Right.
a lot of these. But to just listen, I'm gonna do you like Gary Owen, where you had the guy to come in and say the
Oh,
word.
yeah. Yeah. Say
So
it for me. Yeah. Say it
right,
for me, man.
a lot. They're kids. A lot of these
Yeah.
guys are
Yeah.
kids. Like they're not all grown men.
Right.
Like
Correct.
you did see during the Civil War, you saw a lot of old grizzled guys out there fighting because
Yeah.
those are the people that were volunteering. But of course, during those times, during that time in America, the primary industry was farming,
Yeah.
and these folks were in better shape than you would think. Like
Yeah.
the 60, the 50, well, and then too, some of those guys are just in their 50s. They weren't like 60 or 70. They
Yeah.
just were in their 50s, but they looked old and grizzled. Those guys were in better shape than some of these, 60, 70-year-olds now that you see.
Yeah.
So, but they were a bunch of kids. They were
Yeah.
a bunch of boys, and they
Yeah.
they were a bunch of boys, and somebody gave them a uniform and told them and a gun and told them they were soldiers.
Right, and
So,
that's exactly what happens here. And then they go to a town, and the guy's like, "Yeah, you guys go have some fun. Go pillage and loot the town." So you see the black soldiers all come, they're charging. Now, Matthew Broderick's regiment is not. They're back, and they're watching this happen. And there's a scene that, you just kind of go, "Man, God." A white woman comes out and starts cursing the soldiers. She uses a term that I'm not going to use, but she starts swearing it, saying to them, and then the soldier slaps her, which obviously the guy sees he's on his horse, and he shoots the guy, and he shoots the kid for slapping the white. He's like, he shouldn't have messed with that white woman, and it's one of those things. It's a reminder of that
yeah,
time, of that, like, how dare you approach a white woman as a black man. And you know what I'm saying? How dare you
right,
do that? Like, to even address her at all was one thing, but then to slap her was absolutely another. And
right,
immediately he just pulled out his gun and shot the guy. And I think that really startled Matthew Broderick, because the next thing this guy says to Colonel Shaw is, "Have your man torch the village." And he's like, "What? We're not going to do that." And he threatens to write him up for, insubordinate, for not obeying the command of a superior officer. And so Matthew Broderick, realizing that when the guy threatens him, like, "Well, if you don't, then, blah, 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 I'll set you up on charges and your troops will be mine." And you see that moment of realization on Matthew Broderick's face, like, "I'm not going to do that to them." So
right.
he tells them to, line up, and they light the town on fire. And I think that was a turning point too, because, Shaw at this point is very frustrated because he's already been through so much with this regiment, right? Like I said, the quartermaster wouldn't give him socks and shoes. They couldn't get anything. They didn't have uniforms. They didn't, they had none of that.
Hmm.
And to come now and to think that, okay, maybe everybody's right. They're not going to see any action. This is all that it's going to be, is stuff like this. So it really
Right.
was, I think, a turning point in the movie, and kind of a frustration for. And one of the other important parts, I think, to remember about this, how they depict it, is that he writes letter to his mother. Colonel Shaw writes letters to his mother, who is played by Jane Alexander, by the way, another small supporting character. But some of you may know the name Jane Alexander. She was a big actress, 70s, 60s, 70s. Like, she did a lot of things. She plays Mrs. Shaw, the mom in this movie. But yeah, he always writes her letters, and he tells about what's going on, his tales, his woe, what he feels and all that. So, as we go along here now, they've gotten there. Now, one of the important parts, I think, to hear, where this is exactly, to me, where the tide turns, and they finally realize that Matthew Broderick finds a way in to get his men what they want, which is, of course, to see some action. He finds out that the guy that they go to see there in Georgia is is committing war crimes. He's selling stuff that they loot and pillage to other people, rations, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And he threatens him in
Prosperity.
the office. Yeah. And he tells him, "Well, I can report you, or you can let us go," and blah, blah. And so obviously the guy acquiesces, and the 54th is on its way. And this is, I think, again, this is setting up towards the big battle that
The-
they actually get to fight in, which is
right.
the Battle of Fort Wagner, which Anthony mentioned earlier. But I think, there's still, the thing with this movie is, it's a 2 hour and 2 minute movie, but it does seem to move rather quickly when you're watching
It
it.
does.
Like, you know what I mean?
It
Like,
does.
I had to look at the running time because I'm like, how long is this movie? It's 2 hours and 2 minutes, but it really does move. Like you said, you go from the training with Mulcahy, and one thing about that I wanted to mention, because like Anthony said, a lot of people, if you're watching him, you go, "Man, this guy's a jackass." Like the way, because even Matthew Broderick tells him, "Sergeant, aren't you being a little hard on the soldiers?" And he's like, "Hey, I'm trying to make them soldiers. Like, it has nothing to do with the color of their skin or anything. These men need to, like I said, need to learn how to march. They need to learn how to be in formation. They need to learn how to shoot. They need to, like, he literally was just doing his job, was to
Well,
make
actually,
soldiers." Yeah, go ahead.
a point to your point to add on to that, when he pulls him to the side and he says, "You say this guy's a friend of yours,"
Yeah,
Tom referring to Thomas.
yeah,
And it's
Thomas.
like, it's like, maybe you need to something to the effect of stop babying him and let
Yeah,
him become a man. And
exactly.
that's when he really starts going in hard, because he really starts going in hard on him during training.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Was it rifle training, bayonet training? and
It made it interesting. He hits him in the face with his own gun.
yeah, and he falls down on the ground crying. He says, "Hey, get up, no shame." Like
Right.
that's the moment when you that moment right there when you realize it's like, okay, he wants these guys. These guys might not survive, but if anything I teach them can either help them win,
Yeah.
or get them home safe. That's what I'm
Right.
going to do.
Exactly. So that's why I think that he's, like I said, a small part, but a real important part for this film was John Finn as Sergeant Mulcahy. It's probably kind of an underrated thing. Nobody would think about it, but he really, I think his part in the movie is really great that they depict it, that way. But yeah, so again, there's so many I think moments in this movie. Uh, Handy. One of them I want to bring up now is, we were talking about, the quartermaster would not give them socks or shoes. He was
Mhm.
withholding. So one night, Denzel's character, who is a Private Trip, he had heard
Ah,
about this
yes,
thing. He hears about this thing where if it's like a few miles away from camp, where you can go and they'll feed you and give you shoes and all this. So one night he decides to break out. He decides he's going to go do this and get some shoes. And of course, they realize he's gone AWOL. So when they capture him, they're going to whip him. And you could tell, like, it's a very, and I'll say this because I know up to this point Matthew Broderick was known as kind of a comedic actor. Did Ferris Bueller, did a couple other things. You know what I'm saying?
uh-huh.
He comes into this movie and it's a serious film, but there's a great that during the whipping scene where you could see the pained look on his face when he hands Mulcahy the whip and tells him to commence, because Denzel strips his shirt back and you see all the whip marks he already has. So
Right.
you know that this is, he's used to this, and he looks the whole entire scene. If you look at it, he looks entirely dead at Matthew Broderick the entire time he's being whipped. He does not. Yeah, he
That
does
eye
not.
contact was crucial.
Yeah, he does not at any time blink. He doesn't look away. He looks straight at Matthew Broderick, and then and one of the greatest.
Single
I know
tear.
this. Well, I know this is the cinematic tricks that Hollywood can pull off. You just see one single tear fall down Denzel's face as he's being whipped, and I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't know what that feels like. Okay, I didn't, punishment was not a thing, by the time I was a child.
I
Like that,
find
I'm
that,
saying, like being whipped or no, I'm saying, yeah,
consider
yeah.
yourself lucky because
No,
you
and
grew up
that's
in
what I
the
said.
same era I
I'm not
grew
gonna
up in.
lie. Yeah, no, I know. I'm not gonna lie, but I mean, I got emotional watching that, and I almost started crying. Like I'm sitting here in my basement watching the movie, and I'm like, you just see that single tear fall because he wants to be so defiant, but obviously it hurts like hell. And it's just one of those moments where you sit there and you go, how do you not feel for that person? How do you again? And Morgan Freeman tells Matthew Broderick, he was only trying to find some shoes, Colonel. Like
Mo
that's all
just
the
trying
boy
to
was
feel
trying to
the
do.
truth, sir.
Yeah.
That's all the
And
Mo's trying
and
to
it
do, trying
just
to find the truth, sir.
and this movie is filled with a lot of things like that. Like again, I don't want to understate this because yes, it's a part of American history. And history is not always
Pretty.
rosy. Like let's
Not by any stretch.
the country wasn't built on just like it wasn't built by all like, hey, let's get along, let's shake hands, blah blah blah. Like a lot of bad things happen in American history that some people still are upset about it, and rightfully so. Again, I'm not. This is not a political thing. I'm not trying to get into the what different sides, but my point is, there's a lot in history that maybe we're not proud of. That there are things that happen that aren't great, or that
Mhm.
as much as we love our freedoms and we love being in America and being able to do this podcast as an example, whatever we like to do, there's still a lot of things that happen that and again, not to sound cheesy, but like as far as we've come, there's still more to go. I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, there's
But yeah,
always
I'll
there
just
is
leave it at that.
no
Yeah, there's
there
always
is no
always
such
room for
yeah. There is no such thing as perfection. And since you
yeah
brought up Denzel, this is the perfect the perfect segue because
yeah
he was, I think, the embodiment of all of the men in that unit. He was the one that
yes
said and expressed the things that some of these other men were afraid to say under
correct
fear of punishment. That he was the one that felt, it's like, yeah, you're gonna keep taking the white man's bread, you're gonna keep doing this, you keep doing
yeah
that. He's like, and encourage everybody to tear up their pay slips. And he was the one that pointed out to Thomas, it's like, oh, what do you call him? I forgot just that quick.
Oh, come on, come on,
Snowflake. No,
Snowflake,
Snowflake.
come on,
Come
Snowflake.
on,
Right, you're
Snowflake.
gonna be the
Yeah,
white man's dog,
Snowflake.
Snowflake.
Right,
Right.
exactly. And he has some back and forth with Morgan Freeman over again one of those words,
Yeah.
one of those words. Uh, you know what I mean? And it was a he executed it. I mean, Denzel is definitely on my Mount Rushmore of actors
Oh,
in my lifetime.
100%.
Like, don't get me wrong. There are some for me that are beloved,
Right.
as it were. But this guy right here, Mount Rushmore of actors for me, because he so perfectly embodied the fear,
Yeah.
the fear of retribution, the anger at the unequal treatment, the frustration of trying to do the right thing and sometimes stepping in the wrong direction and having to suffer consequences for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I mean, just he was a beautiful character built into this story, and it's just funny. It's funny now because I've been watching Denzel Washington either on the TV, on my TV, or on a big screen for 40 years now,
Yeah.
and to go back and see young Denzel,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know,
Exactly. Yeah.
to see
Exactly.
young Denzel and to hear the difference between I'm putting cases on all of you, Pelican Bay 24-hour lockdown shoot program, and
Right.
then this guy right here.
Yeah.
So he was I honestly, the Oscar was well deserved.
Yes. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
mean,
Absolutely.
everyone else that had a part, that played a part with him, were incredible in that movie. From the late Andre Brower, rest in peace. He's only
Yeah.
been. Can you believe that? I guess it's still hard to believe he's gone. I don't remember him for Glory because I didn't see
Ah.
Glory until after I saw Duets, which is another great movie.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. No.
I never saw him until Duets with him and Paul Giamatti.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So then I went back and watched. I was like, oh snap, this
It
dude's
was
been
a.
doing some work for a minute.
Was it a Try a Little Tenderness they did?
Yeah,
Oh, that
yeah.
was it.
Try
Yeah.
looking.
From Duets. Yeah.
It
Try a Little
it
Tenderness.
it, it would appear that he made an error in judgment. You know, and he
Yeah.
was
No,
so from Andre Brown to Jimmy Kennedy to Morgan Freeman, every scene that he was in that he had
yeah.
a part in,
Yeah.
to include uh, the argument that they were having from with the other Union soldiers as they were making their way down the road to Fort Wagner.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, so why don't you guys just head on home and the 54th to handle everything, and then I'll
Right.
haul you
Right.
over my
Exactly.
son up,
Yeah.
and there's this fight going on. And I think at that point, there was a pivotal moment where you see um, Morgan Freeman earned Denzel Washington's respect
Yeah.
because the two of them were butting heads all the time. And
Yeah.
and just to give you some, those of you watching, just to give you some, if you haven't seen it, so there's some headbutting between Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington. Like Morgan Freeman's philosophy, like Denzel Washington's accusing Morgan Freeman of just being a bootlicker, just do everything the white man say,
Right.
just yes or no, so 3 bags full, sir. And Morgan Freeman is like, I'm doing what I have to do to survive. We're
Survive.
doing what we have to do to survive in
Yes.
the circumstances that we're in right now. And
Yeah.
it would do you good to try to heed. So there's some words between this white regiment and the 54th as they're making their way along the road to up to South Carolina to Fort Wagner. And is it Carrie Ellis comes up? And it's like
Yep.
he jumps in with the white soldier because the white soldier has some derogatory marks for Morgan Freeman.
Right.
And it's like, you are looking at a superior rank, Corporal.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, pfft. And so Carrie Elvis comes up. He's like, I'm writing you up on charges. And Morgan Freeman jumps and says, nothing, sir. Nothing at all. Just a soldier's fight. That's all, sir. And
Right.
then
Exactly.
everybody separates and goes back on to their own business. And Denzel's
Yeah.
like, okay. And the white soldiers are like, okay. Which you see later on is they're making their way up the beach.
Yes.
And all the soldiers
Yeah.
start yelling, give him hell, 54th.
And it's that white regiment that they were fighting with. Exactly. That's a
Yeah,
great, to me,
exactly.
that's a great moment too when you see that, because then you realize it's about being a soldier. It's not about the color anymore. These guys are going to fight for you as well as themselves. And so, yeah, go in and give them hell,
Yeah.
54. That's a great, to me, that's a great little thing that they added. Like, I think that's perfect that they did that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things of the embodiment of my time in the military is that I worked with guys that came from backwoods where I might have been the first black person that they have ever seen that
Oh,
up close
yeah.
and personal in their
That,
life,
yeah, that's
or
true.
worked with, or been in close quarters with,
Yeah.
and got from and from for the sake of keeping this all PC, from Caucasian people to people of Latin origin, to people
Yeah.
of African and West Indian origin, and people from Asia and things of that nature, and we all came from these different backgrounds. And we had one guy in my platoon that actually had graduated from med school and had joined the army to get
Oh, wow.
a degree, had joined the army with the intent to get his MD certification. But the recruiter did a 52 fake out on him and enrolled and assigned him to a medic unit, a combat medic unit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But he came from that background. I mean, there was a guy in my very first active duty unit that came from money. He didn't need to be in the army. He was. They told him it would be a good idea to join the military to get himself some a little bit of discipline. And of course, he gave less than zero. You know what's about the U.S. Army. But
Yeah. Sure.
I worked with all of these guys, and
Yeah.
no matter what our background and our upbringing, we all work together. And these are guys that I still every now and again pick up the phone and call and talk to.
Yeah.
And that right there, that moment right there in this movie was that embodiment of, all right, we all in this together.
Right.
You know what
100%.
I mean?
Because that's an
Yeah.
important part of the thing too. Since we're getting into that, since you mentioned that, Handy, the Fort Wagner battle was a huge one because we were at that point they were getting smashed, and so
Yeah.
they were going to try to attack this hill that the Confederates had, and so I mean the sorry, yeah, the Confederates. Sorry, I got it right. I'm just my mind is like, yeah. So anywho, sorry, let's get back to that. The the guy tells them, hey, there's going to be a lot of casualties because whoever the first group that goes in is going to get hit the most. He's, it's just going to be the way it is. And then the second wave comes in, and and Matthew Broderick here, as Colonel Shaw says, "I volunteer my men, sir." And he explains to him, that first group going to be a lot of casualties. And he's like, but he's like the 54th would be honored to do that. And so the guy says, okay, if that's, thank you very much. You guys will be the first wave that goes in. And this leads to another one of my kind of favorite scenes in the film because, as some of you, again, may or may not know, in war at this time, you had a flag bearer. You had one person as you were leading the charge who had to carry the flag. And
Uh-huh.
so Matthew Broderick, Colonel Shaw, goes to Private Tripp, Denzel's character, and asks him to carry the flag because up to this point in the movie, like you said, you've seen the transformation of being a defiant soldier to now Denzel has become respected, has been everybody, he's on the right page now. He's ready to, all that stuff. So Matthew Broderick goes to ask him if he'd like to be the flag bearer. And it's important because Denzel, this is where you still see, and this is, I think, a testament to his great acting. He gives him a little speech about, I'm not fighting this war for you, sir. And he goes into this whole thing, and Matthew Broderick, and he tells him, no, I'm sorry, but I respectfully decline. In certain words, he didn't say I respectfully
Uh-huh.
decline, but he tells him that I'm sorry, I'm not going to do. Yeah, he tells him I'm not going to do it.
He not so respectfully
Right,
tells him that he
right. He's
respectfully
not going to.
declines.
And Matthew Broderick is like, in the end, all he could say was pretty much okay, like you know, and it's just such a great scene because again, it's really the first time I think in the entire film, like outside of the one line here, one line there, where him and Broderick have an extended dialogue. Because a lot of times it's him and Denzel and Morgan Freeman, Denzel and Andre Brower, but this is the one time where like him and Matthew have their little scene, and it's a really good one. So I look out for that in the movie if you haven't seen it, or
Yeah.
if you're rewatching. I think you'll really enjoy the scene between the two of them because, again, to me, it's a contrast in styles too. Because again, you've got a guy who's finally taken on probably a really serious movie in Matthew Broderick here with Glory. And Denzel was just off 2 years previous. He was nominated for Cry Freedom, where he played Bantu Stephen Biko.
Stephen Biko.
Yeah, he
Yes,
played
sir.
he got a Best Actor nomination. He didn't win, but he got a nomination that year. And then Glory, he does, and he gets nominated for supporting actor. And this just showed to me, like you said, when you talk about just performances in Denzel's career, this will
Oh
always be
man,
one of my favorites. Just because, again, he's not the lead, but man, when he's on the screen and when his scenes in this film are just phenomenal.
that's
I mean,
his scene.
they're
That is
absolutely, yeah,
his scene.
yeah. Right.
Even down,
You know who's in charge here, and
even
that's a good thing.
yeah, even down to the battle at James Island.
Yeah,
The battle at James Island. I remember he and Searles couldn't stand each other for the
could not.
entire film,
Yeah,
and what winds up happening is somebody's rolling up on Denzel. Somebody's rolling up on Trip,
yeah,
and Thomas saves his life.
yeah.
Even though he has been wounded, he saves his life.
Yeah, excellent.
And
And
then
then
they
you see
all
the
shut.
look on Denzel's face when he turns around and sees that it's Thomas who just saved him. Like,
Right.
even that is just like, okay, we good, Snowflake. Hey, you know what I'm saying? Like, all
Yeah.
of a sudden, like, we're good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Now that was that. Even that was critical. That battlefield scene,
Yeah,
the Battle of James Island, and they take their firing positions and they take on the cavalrymen. The cavalrymen that come
on the horses.
riding in on horseback,
Yeah,
and they start celebrating. And then you can see him. You see Sergeant Major Rollins looking through the smoke, and it's like the look on his face is like,
yeah,
oh shit,
yeah.
here they come.
Right, here
And
they
then,
come.
and now you're in,
It's
as they
on.
yeah, now it's on, like as the kids say, on site.
Yeah, exactly right. All sight.
It's on site now,
Yeah,
as a Joe, as Matthew Modine famously said in Full Metal Jacket, you're in the shit now.
yeah, you're right. Exactly, 100% right. Exactly.
And the battle, and this is their first, their first battle test, and
Yeah,
they come out victorious. I also think this is kind of a turning point as well for Colonel Shaw, because
yeah,
one part that we did not speak about in the very beginning of the movie, this is where we meet Colonel Shaw on the battlefield. I think he
yeah,
was Captain Shaw at that time, or Major
yeah.
Shaw. I can't remember.
Yes, he was captain. I
Uh,
think Captain Shaw.
Leading his troops into battle at the Battle of Antietam, and the Union forces at that point during the Battle of
We're
Antietam
getting their
were
asses
really
whipped.
yeah, the Union forces were getting it handed to him.
Yeah.
You see his commanding officer say, "Good God, we got to get moving," and his head just explodes.
Yeah, right. And that's that's. Well, you know what's funny about that? You mentioned that, and I get right. We did skip that, but I think what important thing to know there is that Denzel Morgan Freeman's character of Rollins was a ditch digger, and
Right,
so in the first battle, you see he's like he comes up and he sees Matthew Broderick laying there on the ground, wound, like he's been hurt. He was alive, because a lot of the guys weren't. They're all just laying there. But then Denzel walks by, and you see him look at Matthew Broderick, and he just kind of gives him the nod and moves on because he knows he's alive. He doesn't have to worry about him. And then
right,
I think
yeah,
it's because if I'm not mistaken, there is a moment, and I don't remember if it's Broderick or Rollins who recognizes the other once they get into the thing. Like, I think it might have been Morgan Freeman who recognized who he
maybe,
was. Yeah, it was something
maybe.
like that where there's just a small moment of recognition of like, oh, okay, I know who you
Yeah,
are.
and that's that whole thing. That's part of the speech that he gives Trip at the end of the movie. He said, "Because I dug it." He said, it's white men and black men out there. I like dying down there battlefields.
Right.
I know because I dug the ditches. I dug the
Exactly.
grave.
Yeah, exactly. So that was
And
just
so
an
it's
important stuff that they've put in the movie. These little things that they've sprinkled
yeah,
throughout that kind of, really make it a complete movie. Which is that's the other thing too, because when you watch most movies, they get to the story, they blow through the story, blah 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 blah, everything. Here's the major action, all that. There's a lot of little moments in this film, little
yeah,
things like that that just tie everything together.
right.
That you kind of just. That's why I say this to me. This again,
An
we
excellent
know that
movie.
Hollywood does put their hands on things like this, and that's fine. There's little touches where you see, okay, that's Hollywood. But the story, from what I can tell and from what I've read, they pretty much got the story right. Like, they didn't
Yeah,
dramatize like that and exaggerate that. What happened in these things is what happened, what actually happened. Character names were changed, obviously, and things like that. But
yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
mean, these things actually happened.
yeah. The only it's worth noting that for a movie that covers a historic event, aside from Frederick Douglass, of course, whose actual son in real life fought in the 54th, um, and Colonel Shaw, 95 97% of the rest of the character names. These are just characters that were just made up for a movie.
Yeah.
So they may have been based on someone else, but the
Yeah.
primary character, once we get into the meat and potatoes of the movie, that it was the only one that actually existed. And I don't know who's calling me at this time of the morning. Oh crap! I'll get back to that in a second.
Sorry, that was funny.
The only person that actually existed was Colonel Shaw.
Colonel Shaw, yeah.
And so, yeah, but we talked about we mentioned the flag bearer, and that is, you said it was based on someone who actually,
yeah, Denzel's
based on
character
someone who
of
actually
Trip,
existed.
yeah, was based on loosely on a real person who,
And I can't really put a finger on it just from what I've been able to look up, but there was a Medal of Honor recipient, a black man by the name of William H. Carney, who was after the fact promoted to the rank of sergeant.
yeah.
But he was not the flag bearer. But when the flag bearer had his legs taken out from under him during the Battle of Fort Wagner, he carried the colors until the Union troops retreated, and he carried it back, and he said, "Boys, the old flag never touched the ground."
Yeah.
And that actually became one of the first patriotic songs about the Civil War. Of course, the main one being the song that we all know and love, and it's been the subject of controversy in recent years, in the national anthem. But this was one of the first big patriotic songs that came out of the Civil War from the life of William Carney. And I have to say, where this movie is concerned, I guess this is where we get to the climax of the movie. And the climax of the movie is the 54th is, of course, they're attacking Fort Wagner. And because, you're attacking a bunch of guys on foot from the only way that you can, they definitely had the advantage in that. For Fort Wagner is a beachfront fort, a beach-facing fort, which means that the only way that they can really attack is from the sea, from the beach side. And they're pinned down, and they say we're gonna stay here till sunrise, and they attack, and they're taking heavy casualties. And as they're coming up on the parapet, that the Colonel Shaw is mortally wounded, as is Trip. And irony that the two of them would wind up falling in, dying in action side by side. And then we see some small reenactment of Trip trying to pick up the colors and move with it. But they gain the upper hand and make their way to the inner portion of the fort.
Yeah.
And of course, they encounter the cannons, and then we see the bodies of the Union troops being buried in these massive ditches.
Yeah.
And
they throw Denzel on top of Broderick. Like you see
There's
Broderick laying in the ditch. Yeah, and then they toss in, Trip, and he lands literally. You see him fall right on Matthew Broderick as there. And it was just it's one of those things, like you said, because when Shaw decides, you see the realization on his face that he's going to go forward. He actually jumps out on his own, and that's when he gets shot. And all the men in the 54th see Shaw go down, and that's when they charge more towards the, like you said, Denzel picks up the flag. You have the whole thing, and they charge forward, and that whole thing. And then, like you said, they get caught because they thought they had the numbers, and picking up, like I said, on the other side of the fort was that kind of the ditch where you can't see who's there. And the minute they look over that, like you said, they face the cannons, and it just then the thing goes to black, as you know what happens.
Right.
Like it's not they're outnumbered. They're going to get shot with but it's just the screen fades to black, and then you just see the aftermath of everybody laying around and them throwing, like you said, the bodies in the ditch. It's just because again, it's a movie, and I'm not gonna lie, I got caught up in the movie, and so
I did too.
These are you're sitting there watching this, and you almost forget for a minute this is a real story, because you're like, man, all the heroes died. You're like, oh my God, all these guys, they made it this far. Like, you really get into it, but that's when you realize this is a truth. This happened. This is not fiction. This was a legit battle. A lot of the regiment did not survive this, and they were not successful. They didn't take Fort Wagner.
No,
so they
did not.
it was a losing battle in that sense, because they didn't end up taking the fort anyways. And all these, so you feel sad. You're like, oh my God. And again, then that realization hits you that, well, this was the, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, the not the horror of war, but like the reality of war
Just
is
the
that
reality of it. Yeah.
people die. Like it's not, it's not a movie, it's not a thing. And these were real men who lived and who wanted to fight because they got, they had freedom. And again, for those who may not remember, these gentlemen were from the North. So they were people that were freed because the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't signed until January 1st of 1863. And these
Right.
guys started training in November of 62. So for people who might be confused about, well, how did they do that? Well, this was the North. And they were a little bit more progressive. They were a little bit more in the sense of that. There were freed black men and, like I said, who weren't slaves per se. Um, so that's how that was started. And then once the proclamation was made in January, they said, I read that another 180,000 black men volunteered to fight because
Yes.
they had gained their freedom in that sense. And so then they were, they wanted to fight. So 180,000 soldiers, black soldiers, then volunteered to fight in the war. So I think that's a telling statistic as well, like in that sense. Because again, whatever your feelings, and again, we're not going to get into the political side, whatever your feelings on the Emancipation Proclamation are, the fact is, black men signed up after that, 180,000
Yeah.
extra
And they
soldiers.
wound up losing. They had the Union side had over 1,500 in the actual battle, 1,500 casualties, with over 200, close to 250 killed, and 880 wounded, and then
Yeah,
389 missing or captured. And that's a pretty telling number for that time,
yeah,
because to lose that many people in one battle in a 24-hour period.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and just for me, historically speaking, I grew up knowing about the Civil War and knowing what it was about. But then to realize that some of the historic events of the war took place, 'cause I'm from Georgia, I'm from Savannah,
Right, that's right.
and to know that some of these things took place, like Charleston, South Carolina, the Battle of Fort Wagner took place.
Yeah,
It's not even an hour; it's maybe a little more than an hour's drive from
right.
Savannah. Fort Pulaski, which is on the shore of the Savannah River, uh, on the shore of the Savannah River, on the way out to the beach, where some small action took place there, in St. Simon's Island, where their troops were quartered before they made their way up the shores to go fight. Like all
Yeah,
of that stuff took place. All the stuff in that movie took place right in that area. As a matter
yeah.
of fact, now that I think about it, there were a lot of people from Savannah that were extras in that movie,
Oh, okay, right, okay.
because a lot of the filming took place in those areas in Charleston, in
Oh,
St.
okay.
Simon's Island, and all of that stuff. So it was a
Gotcha.
really, really huge deal. When Glory came out, I think just about anybody and everybody. I didn't, of course, because that wasn't in 1989. That was not my bag. I was a whole.
Right, that was not my
I was
bag.
off at school and doing all those things. But going
Sure,
back and
sure.
watching that movie, and
Absolutely.
I think aside from the cast of this movie, another thing that set this movie aside was it was one of the first movies, if not the first, to actually delve into the actual horrors of war on the from the battlefield side.
Right, from the battlefield side.
Because a lot of times you saw, I mean, you didn't see, I mean, you had movies like Gone with the Wind. You never saw any battlefield scenes there.
Right, right,
Things like that. Like the scene I described in the Battle of Antietam, where you literally saw someone's head explode on the
right.
battlefield. Um, so it was one of those first movies to go, this is a war movie, and we're
Yeah,
gonna make it a war movie.
yeah.
And I think it kind of set the tone for a lot of movies to come, which is where you started to see a lot of these. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to watch because I'm third generation in my family, as far as I know, third generation military.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to think about some of the things, the atrocities of war that my uncles saw, that my uncle saw in Vietnam, that my great uncles saw in World War II, in Korea,
Yeah,
and those kind of
yeah.
things. So expertly done. Now, something that we didn't touch on, sir,
Yes.
for all the acting and the realism that they tried to put into this movie, the one thing that we did not talk about, and this is something that made this movie, especially with the climactic scenes, was the music.
Oh, score was phenomenal. Actually, yeah.
The
When you
score, the late James Horner,
corner, yeah,
who absolutely, when I say nailed it, I mean nailed it, nailed it. The climactic movie. It almost was like O Fortuna, O Fortuna. You know that classical beat. Deep, 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 deep,
yeah,
deep, deep. Yeah, that one.
yeah.
It was almost along those same lines, right down to the climactic battle scene, where you see the music climaxing, and it sounds kind of triumphant as they're running along through the fort, and
Right.
then they turn the corner and face the cannon. So,
Yeah.
and we're talking about a guy who did music for, just to give you some of his resume: the Titanic,
Yeah.
Avatar, Aliens, Field of Dreams, Apollo 13, Braveheart,
Yeah.
Beautiful Mind, The House of Sand and Fog, The Land Before Time, Legends of the Fall. Um,
Another Edward Zwick movie. While we're on that
yeah,
subject.
How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I think that's the Jim Carrey.
There you go. How the Grinch Stole
The
Christmas.
Jim, the Jim Carrey movie,
Yeah.
the new Karate Kid, and the Amazing Spider-Man, and that's just a handful of what he's done.
Right.
This guy is like was the John Williams of the new age. He no longer with us, passed away in 2015. But I mean, it was just the perfect. This is why this movie is, because you have to have all the elements. You have to have a good story.
Yeah.
You have to have a well-directed film. You have to have a
Yes.
cast that is able to execute and bring out the emotions that you want your audience to feel when they're watching them perform
Yeah.
on the screen. And you got to have a score to go with it.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
100%.
even, it's like certain movies, when something happens with the music, you go, oh, what's getting ready to happen? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. You know.
When somebody's giving a speech and they're playing this music and it sounds like feel good relaxation music, and then they go until, and then the music changes, you go, oh, what's getting ready to happen? You know,
Yeah.
so in movies like that, you talk. I mean, just about anything directed by just Lucas or Spielberg,
Yeah.
any of those movies. Um, um, Tim Burton, it's another director that's known for having the good
Oh
musical
yeah.
score. He
Absolutely.
does a lot of stuff for Danny Elfman.
Danny Elfman, yeah, is his like composer for those things. Yeah.
Yeah, didn't Hans Zimmer do the music for the trilogy, the Christian Bale trilogy, I believe?
Oh, for Batman, you mean?
Yeah, I think. I don't know if it
Might
was
have been. Well, see,
but it
that's the
was.
thing. Like, yeah, those guys. I mean, those guys. Because like Anthony brings up a good point. Like Anthony and I are music men. Like we very have a bunch of deep appreciation for all types of music, and I think scores don't get a lot of like play. Like people won't go, "Oh my god, oh, that just you know a song from a soundtrack if a song is played," but not everybody pays attention to the underlying music, the score of a movie. And when you think about some of the greats that, like you said, Horner doing Titanic, but like John Williams, obviously the Star Wars stuff, Close Encounters, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Ennio Morricone did the stuff for Rocky. Like, so I mean,
Uh-huh.
like these guys, man, like that adds so much to a movie when you have a
Yeah.
great score. I mean, it really does. Like it heightens certain things. Then you hear the music in the back. You go, oh crap! Like you said, something's gonna happen, or just a tender moment, and you hear just some light like piano or something in the background, and you
Right.
just it really does add to the entire thing. And I think that's when I do look like when I listen to movies or when I love a good score and I love that whole thing. So I mean, I think I'm glad you brought it up because you're right, Handy. I did not have that kind of in my notes to mention, but I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, we had to give the late
James Horner's
James
props.
Horner a shout on that, and just quick follow up. It was Hans Zimmer that did the Dark Knight trilogy,
Okay,
and I mean just
okay,
nailed it. And
oh, yeah. Those three
Hans
films
Zimmer.
were great, weren't they? I mean, that's
Oh God, yeah, man.
yeah.
Especially. I mean, you can't throw away.
Heath Ledger.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, his
definitely
performance in
can't.
two and the second one, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Dark Knight.
can't
Yeah,
ever count the guy. Don't count me out ever.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah, they're going to play a little game.
yeah,
But it's great, just an incredible score. So everything about this movie,
yeah,
this movie, it wasn't just the movie itself. It wasn't just an individual part. Some movies you can go, this person deserves the Oscar Everything else about it was crap,
Yeah.
but the acting was incredible. But this
Right.
movie
Yeah.
had everything: the
Yeah.
directing, the acting,
Yeah.
the scenery, the costuming,
Yeah.
the
Period
chemistry
pieces have got to be
between. Yeah,
difficult to costume, but and you've got 500 extras and uniform. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah. Well,
the costume department must have worked overtime on this film.
yeah, but Civil War movies, let's be honest though, Civil War movies can't necessarily be that difficult to costume because that is one element of this country's history that people really, really, really seem fascinated with. I mean, even now
Yeah.
in
True.
2024, you still
Yeah.
have Civil War reenactment groups,
Oh, I
which
had
are
a high
really huge.
I had a history teacher in college who I got extra points for going to one of his reenactments on a Sunday. He gave me
Right,
50 extra points on I was like, I'll go. I'll go watch it.
right.
Right. No
50
problem,
extra
sir.
points.
Yeah.
50 extra
100%.
points, and I'm rocking a 40 in your class right now. Okay.
Right, exactly.
So
No,
let's
no, but yeah,
go.
it was great though. But yeah, and to see an actual because they do it. If you've never seen a war reenactment, ladies and gentlemen, I actually suggest that you go see one because you're amazed at how they get it. Like down, like I said, they have their uniforms, the weapons, they have cannons out. Like they literally recreate specific wars and battles, and it's amazing to
Yeah,
just be like, there's people who do this. I was like, okay, I'll go see a Civil War reenactment.
yeah.
Why not? Like, yeah,
And
it
then,
was
oh
pretty
God.
amazing to me how much detail they put into it.
Yeah. Oh man. And I'm sitting there talking about how a lot of things happen in my neck of the woods where I grew up. I lived in Virginia. I lived right
Yeah.
down. I mean, Manassas was right down the street from, literally down the street from where I lived, and
Oh,
the
okay.
battles that took place in Manassas,
Yeah.
things of that nature, just critical, uh, critical battles that took place during that war.
Yeah.
So to see it all reenacted on screen, something to behold, something to behold.
100%.
I don't know. You said you had some fun facts for me, sir. That's basically our synopsis. You said you had a couple of fun facts for me.
Well, again, it was just stuff I think we touched on a lot of them though, mentioning about how, you know, the character was loosely based on Denzel's character was loosely based on a real person. Uh, they credit a lot of this war to Lincoln and Ulysses Grant for his leadership in terms of the North winning in the end. As
Uh
much
huh.
as early on it looked a little, like that. What else do I got here? Well, yeah, the Edward Zwick stuff I had, because again, here was a guy he had just directed this movie that he directed before Glory, was a movie called About Last Night with Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, Jim Belushi, and Elizabeth Perkins, which is an 80s romantic comedy based in Chicago, which we might have to do that one, Handy. That's a favorite movie of mine, but we'll get into that
Okay.
later. Might have to do that one at some point in this 80s podcast that we love to do here. But yeah, and so you kind of go, okay, you went from About Last Night to Glory. And again,
Hmm.
as Anthony pointed out, or as we talked before the show, Edward Zwick then went on to make a slew of films that were just a total departure from what he had started doing. So that's why I think he deserves some credit too. And I know he didn't win, but he was nominated for this for Best Director, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he did get a nomination, but he did not win. Um, and because this was also the same year, just to sidetrack, where Spike Lee was not nominated for Do the Right Thing. For those of you who know Spike Lee's '89 film Do the Right Thing, he was left. He got a nomination for original screenplay, but was left off the Best Director thing for which a lot of people thought maybe he would have got nominated for Do the Right Thing, which personally I still think is Spike Lee's best film. Again, people could argue and differ with that one, but I think it was just an important film. And again, no Handy, that might be another movie we have to cover here. But anyways, that's
Oh
a
yeah,
different. That's
I'm
yeah,
always down to do a
yeah.
Spike Lee joint. Say
Spike Lee
less.
joint, right, exactly. And since we have three of them from the '80s, you might see a couple here on the old podcast at some point between Handy and I,
Oh
because
yeah,
I was a
yeah,
big
yeah.
Spike Lee fan too at that point, and not that I'm not now, but I was really into his films back then that he was doing. So yeah,
Spike
but
had a
yeah,
way of Spike had a way of addressing social commentary,
yeah,
but in
100%,
injecting a lot of humor into it.
yeah.
So even though he was still able to make his point, uh, it kind of softened the blow. The humor kind of softened the blow in
Of what
some
he was trying to
instances.
say. In some instances,
Some
because in some instances
in
he
some
went for it.
instances,
He just like
yeah,
do the right thing. He just went for it, which I
yeah,
I applaud him
all the
for
way
doing
in.
that. Yeah, that one he just went for it. He's like, hey, this is this. This is how it is. This exists. Bam, I'm gonna show it to you, and he did.
Yeah,
Again, another great
that's the
film.
truth.
But yeah,
That's the truth. But having said that, I think that that's going to do it for us for
yeah,
this week's edition
yeah.
of Popcorn and Parachute Pants, because Nick and I could talk for another half hour or more about everything if it
Yeah, that's
has to
so
do
true.
anything with this movie.
Yeah.
So we do thank you all for tuning in. Those of you that are watching this now, we do appreciate you for hanging out with us and not
Yes, we
thinking
do.
it robbery to spend a little time with us as we
Right.
go back and talk about some movies that took place some 40 years ago,
Yeah,
which
exactly. Isn't
makes
that
me
crazy to
feel
think sometimes? Right.
really old,
Some of
man.
you're
That
going,
makes me
that
feel
movie was
old.
how long ago? Okay.
That
Right.
makes me feel old, bro. Makes me feel old. Dude, 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 dude.
Dude.
Uh,
Dude.
I mean, just things like Facebook is 20 years old, which means that
Yeah.
MySpace has got to be 23, 20, 23,
Oh, good
22,
old MySpace.
21,
Rest in
22
peace,
years old.
MySpace. I mean, they're still around, but like nobody's on it. Right? There's
Yeah.
like nobody does
Nobody.
MySpace. Nobody does MySpace.
Nobody. Just like that.
Okay, Keith Sweat. Take it easy. Don't hurt him. Don't hurt him.
That's another 80s pop culture icon. But having said that, I think on behalf of myself, Anthony Handy, aka Mr. Fingers from Oklahoma, and my partner in crime here, the
Oh,
illustrious Mr. Nick
oh.
Rosario
Well, I
from the
thank you for
Windy
that, sir.
City of Chicago,
Woo!
we appreciate you all for tuning in to this week's edition of Popcorn and Parachute Pants. We'll be back again very soon with a new episode. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled. But until then, we will catch you later.
Bye.
Shut your chocolate!
It's time for another episode of Popcorn and Parachute Pants, a podcast where we discuss the very best of movies of the 1980s. And now, here are your hosts, Mr. Fingers and Nick Rosario.